This one comes in by email. Doc says, the practice I've been working at was purchased by a PE firm last year. The group's in its nymph stages and they're offering a physician investment program, so I'll finally have the opportunity to buy into the practice. That's good. I like ownership. After speaking with the group's legal counsel, the shares offered to the docs who didn't own the practices which were purchased are Class B shares, which don't allow voting rights. Everything else would be the same as Class A shares from what I've been told. Do you have any experience with something like this? Obviously, voting rights are important, but it would be something that would make you avoid this investment opportunity altogether. I see a bright future with this group. The practices involved currently are highly profitable, and I plan on staying in the area long term. Additionally, what are the advantages, tax and otherwise, to becoming partner in practice rather than just a W-2 employee? As I understand, I'll receive a K-1 rather than a W-2. I would imagine I would be able to write off business expenses, depreciation, but would also start having to make quarterly estimated payments. Okay, so let's talk about partnership. First of all, this whole non-voting shares thing. This is not that uncommon in small businesses and even in some larger businesses to have non-voting shares. We have some equity compensation plans for some of our employees here at the White Coat Investor, and the shares that they would get are essentially non-voting shares as well. So it's not uncommon in small businesses that want to retain control to offer those. Basically the bottom line is they usually say, take it or leave it. If you don't want it, fine, but we're not giving you anything else. And the goal is they just want to retain control. Doesn't mean it'll be a bad investment, but it does mean that you don't have voting control. It's not quite the same as what I have in my small Democratic group, where there is no private equity involved. It's just us. And when we want to hash something out, how we're going to cover the holiday shifts, how we're going to staff the ED, how we're going to divide up the pool of money we make, who we're going to hire, who we're going to fire, et cetera, we all get a vote. And so it's not the same thing as that, but it may still be a great investment opportunity if the partnership is doing well and making money. So I wouldn't let that stop you from, investing there or taking that as part of your compensation necessarily just because you don't have voting rights. Okay, so let's talk about partnership. What changes when you make partner? When you become a partner, you go from being an employee to being an owner. So there's lots of changes there. I'm a big fan of ownership. In fact, I'm probably completely unemployable at this part in my life. I just think people would interview me for an employment position and my demands would be so much higher than anybody else's that they'd never hire me. Not that I necessarily demand more money, but when you demand 28 weeks of vacation a year, you're probably not the most attractive employee for somebody. I also like kind of being the captain of the ship and being able to make the call on the things that matter most to me. So I'm probably unemployable. Many docs, I'm sure, feel the same way. But when you're the owner, you take on more risk. You also have a lot more hassle. In exchange for that, if the business does well, there's more reward. And so generally, when you make partner, you make more money. And that's the attraction of making partner. The benefit of being an owner of the business is when the business does well, there is profit. There's money left over after paying all the expenses, and that profit goes to you. Now, if you are an employee and a business does well and is profitable, that profit does not go to you. That's the main difference between being an owner and being an employee. So there's a few different tax things. For example, you get K-1 forms every year, and this is how a partnership income is reported to partners in a partnership. A partnership fills out Form 1065. That's the equivalent of a 1040, except for a partnership. And as part of that, they have Schedule K, and then they distribute Schedule K1 to each of the partners. And that's how your income and your share of the expenses and your share of ownership and everything is reported to you and to the IRS. It's not quite as straightforward as a W-2, but it's really not that hard. You can still, do your own taxes on TurboTax, just putting in a K-1. It's really not that big of a deal. Just follow the directions. You go down the form, you put in the numbers, and it spits out what you owe in taxes. It's not a huge issue. But the truth is you usually get it later. W-2 often comes the 3rd, 4th week of January. A K-1 often comes 1st of March or even the 1st of April. And sometimes, especially with a lot of syndicated real estate deals, you may not get your K-1 until July or even September, and you end up having to file these extensions to do your taxes. So that can be a little bit of a pain that you can't do your taxes quite as early. But honestly, you shouldn't be aiming for some huge tax refund anyway. The ideal goal is to make a little tiny payment to the IRS come April, not to actually get any money back. At any rate, so that's one change. You get K-1s instead of a W-2. What that means for you is nobody is withholding your taxes. Nobody is withholding your payroll taxes, which are Social Security, Medicare, etc. Nobody is withholding your income taxes. So you have to pay those on your own. And you do that once a month, or not once a month, excuse me, once a quarter with Form 1040 ES, which is the estimated payment form. It's no big deal. You put your name and your address and your Social Security on it and how much you're paying. That's it. Those are all the lines on there. And you send it in with a check. You can also make payments online if you want. But you have to remember that you have to make the payments every quarter. If you don't make the payments, you get penalized and you end up with penalties and interest in addition to the taxes that you owe. You also have to make sure that you're having enough paid out in those quarterly estimated payments. Because if you don't have enough withheld, if you're not in the safe harbor, you'll end up again getting dinged. It's usually best to pay the same amount with each quarterly estimated payment. These are due in April, June, September, and January for each of the 4 quarters of the year. I know those aren't all 3 months apart. I don't make the rules, okay? You got to make that second quarter payment after only 2 months after April, but that's just the way it is. But you have to make those payments or you'll get dinged. It's easiest if they're all equal and the IRS doesn't really say anything, but if your income is not really equal throughout the year, that might be difficult. And there is a way to fill out a separate form to justify paying taxes later in the year if you made the money later in the year. But you certainly can't do the opposite. The U.S. federal income tax system is a pay-as-you-go system. So you have to pay as you make the money. And that means each quarter payment needs to cover the taxes more or less owed for that quarter. Now, some states don't do that. Utah doesn't have a pay-as-you-go system. It's all due on April 15th of the next year. You don't have to make a single payment between now and April 15th of the next year. But the federal tax system is not like that. So make sure you are staying in the safe harbor, which means for a high earner like you probably are, either paying 110% of last year's tax bill or 100% of this year's tax bill. And that's how you stay in the safe harbor. They'll give you a little bit of slack the first year, but after that, you're going to get nailed if you don't stay in the safe harbor with those quarterly estimated payments. Now, of course, you're a business owner, and a business has legitimate business expenses. For example, maybe your phone or a pager, if anybody still has a pager. I don't think anybody does. Your work mileage. Remember, work mileage is mileage driven between 2 work sites, like your clinic and the hospital or 2 hospitals. It is not your commute. It is not from your home to a work site or from a work site to your home. But any uniforms, white coats, scrubs, equipment, your CME costs, that's kind of a big boondoggle out there. That's all tax deductible. And you can add that in as unreimbursed partnership expenses when you put your K-1 information into TurboTax, or when your accountant prepares your taxes, they can add that in. So keep receipts for that. That is now all deductible, whereas it really is not deductible these days as an unreimbursed employee expense. You're also responsible for paying for your own benefits. Not only do you have to pay both halves of your Social Security and Medicare taxes now, but you also have to pay for any insurance, health insurance or life insurance or disability insurance that your employer was covering for you. Maybe they provided you a CME fund. That's probably not going to be there as a partner. But the downside is, even though you're responsible for paying for all that, you can't just go out and get your own retirement plan. If you're in a partnership, you can't go open an individual 401k. You have to use the partnership's retirement plan, and it's subject to all the usual measures a 401k is, so that it's not just a benefit for the highly compensated partners and employees in the company. Depending on how many employees you have and how much they make and how much they contribute to the plan, it may determine how much you are able to contribute to that 401k. But a good partnership will often offer a 401k with a profit sharing plan that you can put up to $57,000 into in 2020. I think it's $58,000 for 2021, and maybe even a defined benefit or cash balance plan in addition to that. So look into those as you go to make partner and the rules and requirements for you to contribute to them. And a lot of times you can defer a lot of money to some future year when you're not at your peak earnings level. So overall, I'm a big fan of becoming a partner. Congratulations on becoming a partner. Your job becomes a little bit more secure. You usually make a little bit more money. There's a little more hassle and risk in your life, but it's usually worth it. So I hope that's helpful. If you want your questions answered by the White Coat Investor, record your question at whitecoatinvestor.com/YQA or click the link in the description.